Hi, welcome back to episode 3 of Epsteinland. This one is Dark Money, the Auction of Democracy, How Anonymous Billions Buy American Politics. I want to ask you something. Who is funding the political ads you see between now and November? Not the candidate's name at the end, not the PAC name in fine print. I mean, who actually wrote the check? Where did the money come from? What do they want in return? You don't know. You're not supposed to know. That is not a flaw in the system. That is the system as designed. The opacity is the product. The darkness is by design. In this episode, we're going to follow the money, but this time into the places where it disappears on purpose, into the shell packs and nonprofit fronts and anonymous donors networks that have turned American democracy into something closer to an auction. And we're going to talk about something else, something the Epstein class understands and the rest of us are just beginning to learn. The words we use to talk about all this matter, maybe as much as the facts themselves. On January 21st, 2010, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that changed American politics more fundamentally than almost any legislation in a generation. Citizens United versus FEC. 5 justices ruled that corporations and unions have the same First Amendment speech rights as individual citizens, and that spending money in elections is a form of protected speech, and therefore unlimited. Follow the logic. Corporations are people. Money is speech. Limiting how much money a corporation can spend to influence an election is therefore, according to 5 Supreme Court justices at the time, a violation of free speech. I want to be fair about what Citizens United actually held and didn't hold. It did not eliminate all campaign finance rules. Candidates still cannot, theoretically, directly coordinate with outside spending groups. Stephen Colbert famously put the lie to this nonsense at the time. Contribution limits to candidates, again, theoretically, still exist. But what it did was to open a hole in the dam so large that the distinction between what's prohibited and what's permitted became meaningless in practice. Because once unlimited outside spending was permitted, a new infrastructure exploded into existence almost overnight. Super PACs, 501c4s, social welfare organizations, donor-advised funds layered inside nonprofits, layered inside LLCs. Money flowing through so many entities that the original source becomes untraceable. That is dark money. And most Americans, Sarah Coco's research at the James Madison University confirms this, don't even know what dark money is. They have never heard the term. That is not a bug, it's a feature. Here is what Citizens United produced in reality. Roughly 50 billionaires, 50, now contribute more to American political campaigns than all small donors combined. Not 50,000 billionaires, not 500, 50. That is not a political competition. This is an auction. And in an auction, with only the people with the most money get to bid. Think about what that means for the Koch network, the sprawling infrastructure of think tanks, state-level advocacy groups, media operations, and candidate pipelines funded by Charles Koch and his late brother David. Or the Walton family, heirs to the Walmart fortune who have systematically funded the privatization of public education through anonymous donor networks for decades. These are not citizens exercising free speech. These are dynasties purchasing policies. There is a difference, and Citizens United made buying policy legal. Citizens United did not level the playing field. It supercharged organized and familial wealth. It made every election of an extension of bailout capitalism. The same logic applied to democracy. When things go well, the powerful keep the gains. When things go badly, you absorb the losses. And now they get to write the rules of the game, too. Now I want to shift gears slightly, because understanding dark money is only half the battle. The other half is understanding how it wins. Dark money doesn't just buy ads. It buys language. It funds the think tanks that generate the phrases, the frames, the talking points that eventually become the common vocabulary of political debate. Think about Franklin's and death panels during the Affordable Care Act debates. And once a frame is established, once a particular way of describing a problem becomes the default, it shapes what solutions people can even imagine. It puts our minds in the thinking mode that favors their arguments. That is powerful magic. Anat Shenker-Osorio, a communication strategist I've been following for years, has documented this with extraordinary precision. Let me give you a few examples that will change how you watch political advertising forever. Take the difference between price and cost. When we say a prescription drug has a high price, we are describing an arbitrary number assigned by someone trying to sell something. Price implies negotiation. It implies that the number could be different. When we say a prescription drug has a high cost, we are saying something about inherent value, what something actually costs in chemicals, infrastructure, production, etc., to produce the drug. The pharmaceutical industry spends billions ensuring we talk about drug prices, not drug costs, because high price implies that it is just the way things are. Oh, well, we can't do anything about that. For pharma to talk about high cost, I think would be a bridge too far, even for them. That is not linguistics. That is politics. Here's another one. Insurance companies versus insurance corporations. Company implies a service relationship. You have a company, it works for you. Corporations imply something larger, more impersonal, more extractive. A corporation has shareholders. It answers to Wall Street, not you, not to the community. When was the last time you heard a major political advertisement refer to health insurance corporations? Almost never. They are always companies or providers or plans. The language of service, not extraction. Who decided that? Not you, not your doctor. The industry that funds the campaigns, that fund the politicians, that write the rules. One more framing lesson, and this one is the most important. In 2008, the standard way of describing what happened to millions of American families was they lost their homes. They lost their jobs. They lost their savings. Lost. Passive, as if the homes wandered off on their own. But that is not what happened. Their homes were taken by a financial system that packaged their mortgages into instruments they could not understand, sold them to investors they would never meet, and then, when the whole thing collapsed, asked the government to make them whole while the families absorbed the losses. Shenker-Osorio makes the point precisely. Passive construction hides the actor. It removes the subject from the sentence, and removing the subject from the sentence is exactly what the people who did this want. Not millions of families lost their homes, but J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs took millions of families' homes. The first sentence is a tragedy. The second sentence is a crime. The difference is one word. Who did it? This is how dark money wins the framing war, not just by buying ads, but by ensuring that the vocabulary of the debate never points at the person responsible. Anand Giridharadas raises a powerful reframe that I keep coming back to. He calls it freedom care. The conservative political vocabulary has owned the word freedom for decades. Free markets, free enterprise, economic freedom, the freedom to choose your own doctor, a phrase that has been used deliberately to block universal health care for half a century. Let me give a shout out here to George Lakoff's book, Whose Freedom, which directly challenges the conservative capture of the word freedom. But what if we reclaimed that language? What kind of freedom do you have when you are one cancer diagnosis away from bankruptcy? What kind of freedom do you have when you cannot leave a job you hate because you cannot afford to lose the health insurance? What kind of freedom do you have when your child's asthma medication costs $400 a month and your copay just doubled? Freedom care is not a policy, it's a frame. It says, we believe in freedom too, and true freedom requires a floor, a basic guarantee that catastrophic illness or bad luck does not strip you of everything you have built. Language that resonates across party lines. That is not an accident, that is strategy. And the Epstein class has been using it against us for decades. It is time we used it back. There was one more thing I need to say about dark money in the framing war, and it connects directly back to where this series started. In episode 1, I talked about the conspiracy theory vacuum, when legitimate institutions fail to explain visible wrongdoing, when the media, the courts, the politicians all look away from something that is obviously happening. People don't conclude that the world is random. They find a pattern. They find an explanation. And if the true explanation is never offered, a false one fills the space. Dark money is a perfect example of this dynamic. Most Americans know, at a gut level, that their political system does not represent them. They know that something is wrong, that the policies that get passed don't match what they actually want, that the politicians who get elected don't stay accountable. They are right to feel this, but because the true actors, the anonymous donors, the shell packs, the billionaire networks funding the dismantling of regulations, are deliberately invisible, people reach for explanations they can see. Visible minorities, immigrants, foreign interference, cultural elites. Wrong explanations for real grievances. Naming dark money, making the invisible visible, is not just good policy. It is the antidote to the conspiracy vacuum. I want to end this episode with a direct challenge. The Epstein class does not just buy policy. It buys language. It funds the think tanks that generate the phrases. It owns the media companies that normalize the phrases. It saturates the political environment with a vocabulary that systematically hides who is doing what to whom. We cannot match their money, but we can match their precision about language. Anat Shenker-Osorio's framework is simple and powerful. Say what you value first, not the policy, not the wonkish detail, but the human value underneath. Name the villain specifically and accurately, and then state what you are for, not just what you oppose. Not, we need campaign finance reform, but a handful of billionaires are buying our elections in secret. We believe democracy means every voice counts equally, and we are going to make that law. One of those sentences is a policy position. The other is a moral argument. And moral arguments move people. Policy positions do not. Jonah Berger's research on social influence confirms this. Messages that trigger genuine moral emotion, anger at injustice, pride in doing right, shame at betrayal, are shared, remembered, and acted upon. Technocratic language is not. Dark money is not the end of the story. It is the mechanism by which the Epstein class protects everything else we have talked about. The bailout capitalism, the inherited dynasties, the operating system of impunity. As long as the auction continues, every reform is temporary. Every accountability measure has a price tag, and they can afford it. But there is something worse than dark money, something that the Supreme Court has done not in the shadows, but in plain sight, in published opinions that are publicly celebrated by the people who benefit from them. In the next episode, we're going to talk about how the Supreme Court of the United States systematically dismantled the legal definition of corruption until bribery has become nearly impossible to prosecute and graft has become a lifestyle. We will meet the cases, we will name the decisions, and we will talk about how a $200 fine became the entire enforcement mechanism for congressional insider trading. If this episode resonated with you, share it, because somewhere in your life there is someone who knows the system is rigged and is reaching for the wrong explanation. Give them the right one. The Epstein class counts on our silence and our confusion and our willingness to fight each other instead of them. I'm Chris Hughes, and I'll see you in episode 4.